Hello and welcome to FinTech Talk. Today's episode is revolutionizing credit risk and portfolio management. Now, credit risk is an area that is, for many organizations, stuck in the dark ages. We're looking at archaic software, completely out-of-date practices, which is crazy. There are so many great solutions out there. So what should banks, credit unions, and other organizations be doing around credit and portfolio management? Well, to find out, we've done what we always do, which is assemble a world-class panel. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our experts. We have Tom Byrne. Tom is Head of Product and Innovation EMEA at nCino. nCino, many of you will know, is an all-in-one cloud banking platform. It has more than 1,800 financial organizations as customers worldwide, from the newest neobanks all the way through to the very largest tier one banks. Tom, great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Charles. Thanks for having us.
So good. I'd like to welcome Koresh Kolapurwala. Koresh is Head of Credit Risk, Global Private Banking at First Abu Dhabi Bank. FAB, again, very well-known organization. It is one of the largest banks in the Gulf by assets. It has truly global reach with branches in 22 countries. So it's wonderful to have someone with such expertise with us today. Koresh, great to see you.
Thank you, Charles. Hi, Tom. Thank you for having us on the panel.
Pleasure. And completing the lineup, we have Brad Morris. Brad is an independent credit risk consultant. He brings with him just a lifetime of experience. He now runs his own consultancy, training bankers in the arcane nuances of credit risk. So, Brad, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Charles.
Well, this is a very pertinent time to be having this discussion because the industry is about to be given a kick up the arse. And there's a lovely article in thefinancialbrand.com talking about the changes in the credit risk world. I'm just going to read out two sentences for our viewers. Credit risk management is about to undergo a significant shift with the new current expected credit loss standards. These regulations require financial institutions to calculate loan loss reserves from the moment a loan is issued, rather than when a loss becomes probable, which means they must analyze vast amounts of historical data and additional qualitative factors. I think this requirement's going to give a lot of organizations hyperventilation. They're not up to it. They're not ready to crunch their data. But I mean, Tom, perhaps you could just sum up for us the state of the industry. I mean, what mistakes are banks and credit unions making around credit risk? I mean, they may feel as though they're just about coping, but what do they do wrong?
Yeah, it's a good start to it and a good article. So I think if you look at sort of the history of the industry more broadly, credit risk has sort of followed the way that banking practices has done. I think we all sort of know the old adages of, throughout the retail bank all the way through the wholesale bank up to that, sort of a long time ago, that was very manual and it was very, based off of human decisioning. And that's both on the initial underwriting side, but then also on the monitoring side of the back book, which especially became sort of fraught to being forgotten, lots of operational risk, lots of data being left behind. We've seen sort of banks go on the digital journey across, since the 90s at the very least, to start to streamline a lot of their workflows, start to digitize that, and then start experimenting with, the safer parts of the book in the way that they would perceive it, where it's much more, high volume, but typically sort of lower value tickets that they start experimenting with automated decisioning. And we've seen that move through, and it's not just about decisioning. What we're now starting to see is automated decisioning in most of the Western world is pretty much par for the course. In the way that we're starting to think about it, but it's how can we start to automate all of the other subsequent processes, and how can we start to bring in data that is not evident for sort of a natural human to be able to understand, start to use predictive analytics, start to use alternative sources of data, start to use, non-traditional financial mechanisms to be able to start to make these types of assessments. In the old days, it just used to be a credit score. Nowadays, we're starting to look more at sort of the cash flow balances, the behavior of the customers, the behavior of the end consumers. So I think you're going to continue to see this trend, but I think the availability of the different data sources to create more effective insights, to be able to more effectively target your portfolio and understand your customers is going to continue. But I think we're on the cusp of truly unforeseen amounts of automation that can happen too. We still have, even in this digital age, lots of credit risk professionals basically playing the role of admin assistants, being forced to manage difficulties through systems, being able to navigate to various different parts of the ecosystem to start to get a full picture of the customer. And with everything that we're seeing with AI, with the advances that we're seeing in some of these systems, you're now starting to see these ecosystems come together, give you a unified picture of risk using disparate data, and really allow you to start to make predictive assessments over what the right type of facility would be for a customer like that.
Love it. That's such a great overview. Krish, perhaps you could just give us a feel as to where the industry could be going. What is possible? And what's the dream scenario? Are we looking at, say, banks eliminating humans altogether? Is this going to be an entire data-driven process? How do you see it?
I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I mean, the banks today definitely are, focused on leveraging technology. I mean, we've seen that evolve over the past few years, and now with AI coming to the picture, it's definitely made it, it's a race to the top, in terms of who reaches there faster. I don't think I don't think we are there yet where you could use technology to replace a human being. But anything could happen in the future. 10, 15, 20 years from now, we might see a completely automated procedure which doesn't require human interaction or human intervention in that process. I think the biggest challenge that we have today is to identify the places where we can actually use technology really efficiently to sort of eliminate those processes and those inefficiencies altogether. And that's where the challenge is for banks, to identify those pockets of areas where they can actually completely automate without the feeling of losing control. That's where the bigger challenge is, I think.
Great. And Brad, just to flesh it out, really, perhaps you could give us a feel for what it's like for users. I mean, we ought to start always really with the customer experience. From the customer perspective, what is currently lacking? Where are banks and credit unions falling short? When we talked about automating decisions, that's got to be a good thing, right? I mean, where are the frustrations here?
Charles, I think the frustration is how much, if there is a robust mechanism in place to deal with the human element, to deal with the appeals that could come in place, not only within the bank or the credit union or the insurance companies with their own ecosystem, but also are the staff trained up enough to deal with that? Now, credit scoring has come a long way, and as long as your models are transparent and you can see what is going on as to why a decision was rendered, and what you would ideally like to do is have AI bolt onto that and say, we could probably get to a more we can get better terms, better limit, better monetary, more flexibility, if you can bolt on some predictive analytics on top of that. But right now, as you said in your opening, they're struggling with data administration. They're struggling with cutting and pasting from annual reports and disparate systems all throughout their back office, and trying to come up with a coherent decision that can meet ever-increasing aggressive commercial targets. And they're spending all their time doing data analytics. What they should be doing is the value add, which is making a decision where the AI basically stops and it says, right, this is where I need you to take up the moral implications, the ESG considerations, and so forth.
Tom, I can see you nodding furiously at what Brad's saying.
No, it's a great point that sort of Brad's making, and we talk to some of the largest financial institutions that exist in the globe, and quite often it is definitely not a lack of availability of data that is the problem for these banks. A lot of the time, it's how do I structure that data in the right way and make it, as Brad was saying there, make the insight present to the human, be that the end customer or be that the colleague, in a way that allows them to do their job more effectively. These if you think about the sort of data set that especially the large banks are sitting on, it's some of the richest analytics data that exists in the world. They know our behaviors, they know our spending patterns, they know our bad habits, dare I say, if you start looking into stuff like this. But you can start to predict and look into all the different cash balances. And how do you start to unlock that to turn what is such a rich data source into something that you can constantly monitor, make sure that your bank's performing at sort of the right risk level, and tweak it as appropriate as you start to see, signs of distress in the economy, whether it's different sectors, whether it's certain spending pattern behaviors, whether it's affordability assessments. It's really for us the sort of main challenge that we see and where we're seeing this start to fall down is there's almost too much data. How do I start to turn this into something that is genuinely valuable, as opposed to just getting drowned in the data, getting drowned in the process, and forgetting about, as you said right at the start, Charles, the customer experience, be that either the end customer or the colleague at the bank, to sort of help them orchestrate everything else that's happening and all the exciting digital transitions that are typically happening at these financial institutions.
Any practical advice, Tom? I mean, organizations regularly say, yeah, we know we're drowning in data, but I'd love to hear some practical ideas. I mean, what is it? Is it about training data scientists in the needs of the bank or what the customers actually want? Is it refining models? Is it what advice do you have, Tom?
Yeah, it's a common challenge that we see as well. I'd say the biggest pitfall that we see, and obviously we're close to a lot of credit transformation programs, is a lot of time banks undertake a technology transformation without a real thorough understanding and sort of the right investment going into the data transformation that needs to happen to underpin it. You see lots of these shiny new AI models, you see lots of these shiny new toys, so to speak. But if you fundamentally can't unlock your data, be able to structure it and get it into a place where it can be used, all of these tools, they're only as effective as what goes into them. So we always, at the start of every program, overemphasize the amount of work that needs to go into the data unlocking. That's typically where the skeletons are buried, especially at some of these more archaic solutions. And then just be very deliberate about the type of data that you need to start to get out there and start to structure. For example, we work with a lot of commercial banks where a lot of the financials of customers still exist in Excels and, databases that can't really be touched on sort of a portfolio scale, which automatically you're sort of siphoning yourself off from some of the possibilities to have sort of a true end-to-end integrated risk experience that exists for the customer. So really, it's about prioritizing the data, making sure that you understand where your data sources are coming from, making sure you have a really robust plan around how you're going to get that data into a structured database that then allows you to take advantage of some of the really interesting tools that are coming online that are really revolutionizing this space. But all of them, the foundations of it, are having data accessible and structured in a way that makes sense for these types of models.
That's great. When the data is accessible, there's so much you can do with it. I mean, Koresh, one theme that gets mentioned is this idea of moving from reactive to proactive approach to risk management. And a lot of our viewers will be thinking, well, what the hell does that mean? Just tell us what that does mean and what the potential is. For an organization that really has mastery of its data, what's the potential for proactive risk management?
See, today, I mean, we're living in a period in a very heavily globalized economy, which is fraught with challenges on the macroeconomic level, geopolitical level, the evolving regulatory landscape that's there. You have industry-specific factors that need to be dealt with, and the list goes on. I mean, the problem that we have today is that how do you deal with these intermingled risks, and how do you manage them and sort of sail through them without compromising the overall integrity of your portfolio, of your overall credit risk. The traditional way was effectively basically trying to change your models, tweak model here and there based on what's changing in the economy, and continue with that approach. But now I think with the availability of technology, with AI coming into picture, tools such as scenario analysis, forecasting of capabilities that are there to incorporate uncertainties in the geopolitical tensions that are there in the Middle East, for example, identifying risk limits and triggers that are sort of dynamic with the economic movement. and the macroeconomic changes. Those areas are something that sort of will help financial institutions transition towards a more proactive, forecasting-based approach towards risk management.
Wow, that's a great vision, complicated to execute. Brad, just tell us about AI in credit risk. I mean, what's the ideal role?
The ideal role, I think, just going back to what Koresh was talking about in adjusting your models, there's two parts of it. First of all, making sure that the data is robust enough. Let's just pretend that we've got some data integrity flowing in the place there, and and we can keep Tom happy, for example. But we've got the models flowing through. If you're starting to adjust customer credit limits, for example, that's going to interfere with your customer experience. You don't want the customer to find out, for example, that their limits drop from 100,000 to 75,000 for reasons unknown. So you're going to have to capture that in place as well. But the other thing is there's a growing requirement from a lot of these financial institutions, a lot of these companies, certainly from my experience, is that they want somebody who is an expert in credit and an expert in, let's say, statistical analysis. And they are very big. They take a lot of time to get the experience you need to make those sort of decisions. I have a feeling those people don't exist, or if they do, they're unicorns somewhere up in some mountain in Switzerland. But for the most part, there is demand to say, we have this data, but how do we mesh that into credit? Or we have this credit expertise, how do we interpret the data? And there is this incredible mismatch in there because they are such large skill sets to master on both sides of the house.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, part of me thinks it sounds like a hellishly difficult thing to model in, say, global events into any sort of credit risk model. I mean, predicting just one event, such as the American election, extraordinarily difficult. It appears to be a coin flip. How on earth could you factor that in? And if you do have AI involved in credit risk, A, does everyone understand the underlying mechanisms? How is that AI making decisions? And B, how can you avoid anomalies or detect anomalies? I mean, is it a high risk strategy implementing AI, Tom? Because I just think of so many ways it could go wrong. Even as Brad says, you start to introduce, I don't know, what on the face of it appear to be clever decisions regarding people's credit limits, and customers are baffled. They might even feel insulted. Their credit, their ability to borrow drops down 10%. They think, what have I done wrong? So it just seems fraught with danger. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm currently in North Carolina in our headquarters, so I'm not going anywhere near the US election. In a split state right now, so got to keep it there. But look, on a more serious point in terms of the models and more specifically what we see with AI, I think a lot of people automatically jump to the assumption that AI is going to automate every credit decision. And our experience is actually that's the kind of last place that banks are going to get to on sort of their AI journey when they're starting to look at this. Of course, they're using it to augment. Of course, they're using it to bring in data, but given some of the challenges with explainability around credit decisions, most regulatory landscapes are very, very skeptical of using that for full-scale decision in that type of way. What we're actually seeing instead, and where I think the potential in the short term for it is actually how does the AI aggregate a lot of the data? You did make me happy, Brad, but then present it in a way that a human can understand. So often you've mentioned sort of geopolitical factors there. Right now, sort of base one that a lot of the financial institutions are trying to do is just look around the estate that I have and show me all of the different parts of the risk, and then show me the thresholds where there's actually something that I need to care about. Whether it's something around sort of the jurisdiction that you might care about, whether it's more traditional, cash flow based, how they're starting to predict there, how covenants are trending, how collateral that they might be putting up is sort of looking. It's about using the AI to take away the complexity of all of the different data sources and just present it in a way that's you and I can understand so we can make an informed decision. Are we going to get everything right? Probably not, but that's the first step we're seeing a lot of the institutions take to start to integrate AI into their risk decisioning processes. And then they'll start to, our prediction is as regulator appetite and the technology matures, you can start to push it further and further into the amount of automation that you want, obviously backed then by historical data and showing that you're making safe decisions. So I think it's going to be a journey, but I think it's exciting. It's exciting to be in credit risk these days, and who thought we'd be saying that a few years ago?
Yeah, Koresh, how does that sound as a vision? So AI does a lot of the heavy lifting, but still fundamentally, it's humans having their lives made easier by all this technology, including AI. Sounds pretty enticing.
No, absolutely. I mean, Tom mentioned it absolutely perfectly. When one aspect is the regulatory landscape and the regulations that surround the use of the cloud, offshoring the data. Central banks are not happy with it. From the private banking perspective, you have Swiss secrecy laws in Switzerland where you can't take that data out. That's one aspect which has to be considered. The other aspect is like Tom mentioned, the identifying those opportunities within the portfolio to optimize. And that's where AI will step in at the first step to look at, a certain sector of individuals that you can probably target new products to, or you could probably reduce, your asset quality metrics, your NPL ratios, maybe by doing something, XYZ. Identifying those pockets of opportunity that will help create more efficiency in the portfolio. And it's all about quality rather than quantity. You don't want to go ahead and affect all your customers. Like Brad correctly mentioned, you don't want limits moving dynamically up and down, because that's not going to make the customer happy, and that's certainly not something that banks want to have. But identifying, let's say, at the industry level, based on the forecasting capabilities of AI, you determine that the real estate sector is potentially higher risk given the economic conditions, and you sort of tweak your industry limits accordingly to sort of reduce lending to that sector. That's an example.
Yeah, Tom, again, I can see you agreeing with this, which is, again, a really lovely prospect. So you're able to tweak the model by sector, almost on a more personalized level. So you can chop up by sector or go even more nuanced and talk about, subsets within that, even all the way down to the individual. So again, that sounds like there's a lot of potential here for servicing customers better. Tom.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what Koresh said around its quality over quantity at the moment is really pertinent, because that's what we're feeling in the market. Like, you look at the numbers, loan growth is stalling. It's not growing exponentially, certainly across sort of the UK and parts of Europe. It's not sort of increasing in demand. You're seeing private credit come in and take up sways of it. So a lot of financial institutions, the more traditional stuff, a lot of the game now is understanding their customers and, like, how do I more proactively support them? And you can only do that if you understand your customer better without, we've all had product pushes. We don't want to be in that game where we're just sending generic notifications that don't have any context and don't feel like they're connected to my business or my personal circumstance that I need funding for. So I think you're exactly right, Charles. I think we're going to see more sophisticated ways to start to understand customers that then allows you on the customer experience side to personalize the type of offer. It's emotional, right? Like, so the more that we can connect it to, I'm a growing business, I'm hitting my working capital limits, whatever it might be, which is data that these banks are sitting on, and then contextualizing the type of growth that they want in that. Those are fundamentally the type of institutions that we see in the next few years that are going to do very well, is sort of the prediction.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead, Brad. I just want to ask you at some point, Brad, about the skills people should be learning in credit risk. I mean, I've never been trained as a credit risk manager, so I don't know what's involved in the education. But if someone young is watching this and thinking, yeah, I'd really love to improve what I'm doing. I mean, there must be so many different ways they can improve themselves, from learning about, data science, learn about AI modeling and stuff like that. What do you recommend, Brad? What recommendations can you give people watching this on how to improve their education?
So if you're talking about data analytics, that can be applied in anything. That can be applied, let's say, in return behavior on purchases, on enrollment behaviors from various regions. Credit, you will have to understand the key points. And one thing you can go back to, for example, if you're just starting out, is the Altman Z score, for example. That not only shows credit scoring at its starting point, but it also shows the most important parts within a set of accounts that can predict financial health of an individual borrower. So it's important that they get those fundamentals about how to assess liquidity and debt service and profitability and operating efficiencies. So understanding how to walk that through. And secondly, just trying to bolt again these two animals together. What ideally you'd like to see out of AI, certainly as a user, is something that can give you, I suppose, robust forecasting to say, if I'm going to give a credit limit of X and I'm allowing this for 6 months or something, is there anything in 6 months I've got to worry about? Can I stress test the qualitative and the quantitative information within the business to say, will anything go wrong in 6 months? If you're doing, let's say, leasing for cars or for property, they have a 4 to 5 year time horizon. And once you lease, you don't really have the opportunity to pull back. And all you're really doing is saying, do I have to provision more? Because you can't really reach out and pull the asset back just simply because you think that customer has got a slightly higher risk profile. So the other thing is, what actions are you going to do?
Okay. Yeah, Tom, and again, if people want to improve their performance in credit risk, what areas do you suggest, if it's a young person watching this, what advice would you pass on to them? Because there's so many different areas they could be studying.
Yeah, I think Brad hit some of the great themes. I think maybe we just contextualize it in sort of how we see, and I think we're starting to see already some of this change start to happen. It's, the traditional credit analyst and the underwriter, we are seeing reductions in their numbers at banks. There's been public announcements of stuff like that happen. And I think that's a trend that is going to continue. And we'd be naive to think that it's not. Like, banks are looking at sort of the bottom line and how do they start to remove some of that cost, which also has an experience. But what we're seeing as part of that is a lot of that seems to be coming from the more junior administrative side of sort of the credit risk. And you're starting to see more and more people specialize in, whether it's in the commercial bank in certain sectors and going deep in understanding aviation and understanding oil and gas, whatever it might be, at sort of those larger institutions, but moving the humans away, which is a positive, I would argue, away from sort of the more menial orchestration of systems, aggregation of data, and sort of the more basic calculations and ratio analysis, into actually being presented with, here's the facts about this company and the sector, and then using their genuine experience and sort of their humanity, so to speak, in certain areas, certainly in the higher ends of, when you're talking about bespoke deals, large corporate deals, where you're seeing credit analysts provide huge amounts of value, both in the underwriting of the initial deal, but then the ongoing monitoring of the customer, where they're typically much more experienced from a sector and geography perspective than your typical day-to-day person that might be looking at the most standard mortgage that either one of us might apply for, if that makes sense.
So that really, yeah, I mean, that is a theme. I mean, Koresh, from what I'm hearing, from Tom and Brad, is that credit risk can actually move to a more central position within a bank. There is the opportunity to cross-sell, to learn about customers, to communicate with customers better. And I think Tom said it's never been more exciting time to work in credit risk. But actually, that's justified by that vision, is it not? That credit risk is not just about saying, yes or no, or adding numbers. It's actually an incredibly rich and diverse environment which can advise all areas of the bank. I mean, is that a fanciful vision?
Absolutely. I mean, it encompasses the entire life cycle of the credit journey of an account. When it comes from the initiation stage, at the time the customer comes to the bank and applies for a facility, to right at the end till the last dollar is paid off. And the entire life cycle is where credit risk is sort of involved. And just building off what Tom mentioned, I mean, in terms of the necessary skill set that's needed for an individual today in credit risk is not just a link to knowledge of how credit works, but also that functional experience within an industry or a sector or a geography, which sort of will add so much more value, because that's where the focus is shifting today. I mean, you have niche sort of roles that have been created. I mean, look at mine, for example. I look at private banking per se, and that itself is a niche segment within credit risk. I mean, the bank does, we do, lending to all segments of the customer base, but I'm looking at private banking specifically, which is a separate, segment altogether, and separate functionality, separate, functional experience required, knowledge of
Terrific.
those investment
And
products.
I'd just like to ask to finish really just about how organizations know whether they're doing a good job. A lot of people will be watching this and thinking, we kind of do some of that stuff, but we're not really sure if we're cutting edge. I mean, Brad, how do people know if they're doing a good job? What metrics are there for knowing if an organization is competent at credit risk and doing all the different things we've talked about, including being proactive on risk and altering models and even cross-selling?
Okay, so the big one is just looking at your days outstanding to see what your arrears portfolio is like, and so that's probably the biggest dimension. Also, now there's sophistication in risk grading. You can see, are you taking on board more risk? Are you being compensated for it? Do you have the control over those risks as well? To put those in those in place, and yeah, so and trying to pull those things together and make a coherent trying to make coherent decisions. Also, when you have a lot more globalization happening, it's important that people who have in-country expertise can understand that, because if we're going to centralize, certainly if let's say if there's a globalization, if there's global centralization. So I know, let's say in Eastern Europe, there's a lot of back office processing for a lot of Europe-wide or even worldwide operations. Simply one size won't fit all, and one model won't fit all. So the models have got to be tuned and calibrated to understand the market, to understand the qualitative aspects of the business as well, understanding things like barriers to entry, capital requirements, accreditations that need to be put in place, all of which either strengthen or dilute the overall credit risk that you're taking.
Okay. And yeah, Tom, again, you see a lot of organizations. What are the sort of red flags with a bank or a credit union or other financial organization? When do you know they're not quite up to par and they ought to be, well, worrying and or panicking?
Yeah, I mean, the classic one is the amount of defaults that they have, right? Like that's what a lot of credit risk people have lived and died by for, and what they will continue to live and die by. The game is to make sure that we lend money to people that can support it and have the ability to pay us back. That's what we're trying to do at the end of the day when we look at credit risk. But I think, once you've sort of moved beyond that, and Brad mentioned some of the other indicators, whether it's the portfolio health, whether it's arrears, whether it's sort of your average LTVs, you have all of these types of metrics that sort of portfolio managers will be looking at. But I think it's what Koresh said and what you mentioned, Charles, that like maybe on a more subjective manner, it's like, am I moving my operating model from a reactive risk management process where I'm asking humans to do a lot of the admin work, I'm asking humans to review it on a yearly cycle or a quarterly cycle, or whatever it might be, and am I now having data make much more of these decisions and alerting me to issues or growth opportunities, which is the other side of it, that increasingly you can use the same type of measurement to understand if you need to go left or right. But is my bank actually on the road to being proactive and taking advantage of these tools to be able to make everybody in the value chain's life easier? Be that the customer, be that the underwriter, be that the relationship manager in commercial, whoever it might be. And I think that's where banks have really got to challenge themselves to say, do I really have a roadmap that shows me sort of that emerald city in the future? And am I making meaningful steps towards it?
And Chris, just to finish us off, maybe not conflicting visions, but as priorities here, we've had about a lot that can happen within a credit risk department. But again, fundamentally, it comes back to, are people paying back their loans? I mean, what's your vision? Do you see credit risk as being something that needs to be driving the whole bank and contributing to cross-selling, to customer relationship management? Or is it still fundamentally about that core overriding metric of defaults? Are people paying back what they said they'd pay?
I mean, that's the underlying thing, right? I mean, today banks, we need to look at the NPL ratios of the banks, compare that with the industry peers, see how the bank is performing. But it's also a combination of other elements, other risk metrics that are considered. It's not just the NPL ratio. However, the banks, we're looking at driving sort of a understanding of how the bank is doing overall, so taking into account all the other risks as well, and making sure that it's on an overall basis a healthy place, to put your money.
Great. Well, guys, thank you so much for that overview. I mean, I've changed my mind a little bit on this. I kind of went into this session assuming that we'd be looking at a really heavily automated sector with automated decisioning. I think, Tom, you framed it well when you said, no, this is about making life easy for human beings. And yeah, I think, Koresh, your vision of credit risk being able to just inform all sort of different types of the parts of the bank being active rather than reactive. It's a new world, really. And yeah, and Brad, thank you for your contribution about yeah, education, training, what young people can be doing, because this is such an exciting sector. So guys, thank you so much. That was a wonderful rapid tour of credit risk and the revolution that we're in the middle of. And for everyone watching, everyone here at FinTech Talk, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.